Friends, welcome to this presentation on Abdu'l-Baha and evolution, bringing 21st century evolutionary biology into the discourse. My name is Doug Perry. In conducting elevated discourse in the larger community on any subject to which the Baha'i writings can be brought to bear, it is essential that we meet the intended audience on their ground. This is especially important in the realm of the sciences, and perhaps critical in any discussion with professional scientists regarding evolution. In this context, this presentation will address a problem which can be explained in 4 points. First, because Abdu'l-Baha's statements on evolution were made in the very early 20th century, Baha'i discourse on evolution is rooted in and often limited to this historical period, which conceptually for evolution is actually still in the 19th century. Second, Baha'i discourse on evolution is predominantly philosophical, with little or no reference to modern evolutionary biology. Third, this lack of true biological understanding has given rise to so-called Baha'i interpretations that are at odds with established scientific findings related to evolution. A recent example of this is an independently published book by a Baha'i author that propounds the scientifically discredited notion of parallel human evolution. This problem limits discourse with non-Baha'i scientists and biology-informed audiences. To address this problem, my presentation will present Abdu'l-Baha's statements on evolution in the context of current Baha'i discourse, examine basic evolutionary theory, provide an overview of the historical development of evolutionary biology, introduce current trends in evolutionary biology, and discuss the barriers to effective discourse on these topics. To lay the foundation for this presentation, we will briefly review some statements that Abdu'l-Baha made that are pertinent to evolution, and in particular human evolution. Given the time constraint for my presentation, I will only read through these statements, which most of you are already familiar with, and not comment on them. Life evolved gradually from a sole origin. There is no doubt that initially there was a single origin. There cannot have been two origins. For the origin of all numbers is 1 and not 2. The number 2 is itself in need of an origin. It is therefore evident that originally matter was one, and that one matter appeared in a different form in each element. Thus various forms appeared, and as they appeared, they each assumed an independent form and became a specific element. But this distinction attained its full completion and realization only after a very long time. Then these elements were composed, arranged, and combined in infinite forms. In other words, from the composition and combination of these elements, countless beings appeared. Man progressed through stages. From the beginning of existence in the womb of the terrestrial globe, man gradually grew and developed like the embryo in the womb of its mother, and passed from one shape and form to another until he appeared with this beauty and perfection, this power and constitution. It is certain that initially he did not possess such loveliness, grace, and refinement, and that he has only gradually attained such form, disposition, comeliness, and grace. Man is a distinct species, not an animal. But at all times, even when the embryo resembled a worm, it was human in potentiality and character, not animal. The forms assumed by the human embryo in its successive changes do not prove that it is an animal in its essential character. Throughout this progression, there has been a transference of type, a conservation of species or kind. Realizing this, we may acknowledge the fact that at one time man was an inmate of the sea, at another period an invertebrate, then a vertebrate, and finally a human being standing erect. Though we admit these changes, we cannot say man is an animal. In each of these stages are signs and evidences of his human existence and destination. Man is a composition of elements that attracts the human spirit. Beyond this, the members, constituent parts, and composition that are found within man attract and act as a magnet for the spirit. The spirit is bound to appear in it. Thus, when a mirror is polished, it is bound to attract the rays of the sun, to be illumined, and to reflect splendid images. That is, when these physical elements are gathered and combined together, according to the natural order and with the utmost perfection, they become a magnet for the spirit, and the spirit will manifest itself therein with all its perfections. Evolution is governed by natural law. The phenomenal world is entirely subject to the rule and control of natural law. This nature is subject to a sound organization, to inviolable laws, to a perfect order, and to a consummate design, from which it never departs. Similarly, the terrestrial globe was created from the beginning with all its elements, substances, minerals, parts, and components. But these appeared only gradually. First the minerals, then the plants, then the animals, and finally man. But from the beginning, these kinds and species were latent in the earthly realm and appeared gradually thereafter. For the supreme law of God and the universal natural order encompasses all things and subjects them to its rule. Man is a necessary part of existence. We will now present spiritual proofs that human existence, that is, the human species, is a necessary existence, and that without man the perfections of divinity would not shine forth. If man did not exist, the universe would be without result, for the object of existence is the appearance of the perfections of God. We will now look at the current practice of discourse in the Baha'i community regarding the subject of evolution. In the time of the Master, Darwin's theory of natural selection asserted that natural selection is the primary factor driving evolution, whereby species exhibit variations and those best adapted to their environments are more likely to survive and reproduce. The concept of common descent holds that all species share a common ancestor, evolving through a branching tree of life. Gradualism describes this evolutionary process as slow and occurring over unimaginably long periods. However, in Abdu'l-Bahā's day, the concept of evolution was more philosophical than truly scientific, because evolution could only be conjectured through found evidence. Darwin himself was not an experimenter, but a meticulous observer. At the time, there was no understanding of the actual underlying biological mechanism of evolution. There was no formal science of evolutionary biology. As it should be, Baha'i discourse on evolution is rooted in the relevant statements of Abdu'l-Bahá, the explications of Shoghi Effendi and the Universal House of Justice, and the secondary literature of Baha'i scholars. Discussion begins with reference to evolution as it was understood in the Master's day, which is fully appropriate. However, ongoing discussion remains fixed in this 19th century image, as if the subject of evolution is static and fully contained within classical Darwinism. This attitude can hinder meaningful discourse in a wider community with both professional biologists and the larger public. How does evolution happen? We'll look at some canonical causal factors next. Canonical because these have been central to evolutionary theory for many years. Natural selection is a fundamental mechanism of evolution that drives the adaptation and diversification of species over time. It operates on genetic variation within a population, favoring organisms with traits better suited to their environment, which increases their survival and reproductive success. These advantageous traits are then passed on to subsequent generations. Mutations are changes in the DNA sequence that serve as a primary source of genetic variation within a population, providing the raw material for evolution. Mutations can be inherited if they occur in reproductive cells, allowing advantageous traits to be passed on to subsequent generations and contributing to evolutionary change. Genetic drift refers to random changes in frequencies of gene variants or alleles within a population due to chance events. Genetic drift can occur when a small group of individuals establishes a new population with a different gene frequency distribution compared to the original population. This could occur, for example, if a group of butterflies from a larger population are blown onto a distant island because of a storm. Gene flow refers to the transfer of genetic material between populations of the same species through the movement of individuals or their unfertilized reproductive cells, such as pollen in the case of flowering plants. It can introduce advantageous alleles that increase the overall chances of survival. In Baha'i discourse on the subject, it is often assumed that there is only one type of evolution, because this was the assumption in Abdu'l-Bahā's day. We will now update our understanding according to current evolutionary biology. Microevolution refers to small-scale changes in allele frequencies within a population over short periods of time, resulting in the slight but observable rise of new traits. In contrast, macroevolution refers to large-scale evolutionary changes that occur at or above the level of species, resulting in the emergence of new species and higher taxonomic groups. These changes typically take place over long geological timescales, spanning millions of years. Divergent evolution is evolution as conceived in the popular imagination. It is the process by which related species evolve different traits as they adapt to various environments. This process involves the splitting of an ancestral lineage, resulting in new speciation. Convergent evolution occurs when distantly related organisms independently evolve similar adaptations due to experiencing similar selection pressures. This can be observed in such disparate species as dolphins, which are mammals, sharks, which are fish, and ichthyosaurs, which are aquatic reptiles that flourished millions of years ago. Despite the very different physiologies and ancestral history, these species developed similar streamlined bodies, tails for propulsion, and fins for navigation. Parallel evolution refers to the phenomenon where two different species evolve independently yet in parallel. This process occurs when species that share a common ancestor adapt to a comparable environment or ecological niche, resulting in similar structures or functions despite their separate evolutionary paths. For example, kangaroo rats in the genus Dipodomys, shown on the right, and jerboas in genus Alectaga, shown on the left, have independently evolved parallel adaptations to their similar desert environments. In the Baha'i community, there is discussion about the possibility of parallel human evolution, a concept based on a literal interpretation of some of the statements of Abdu'l-Bahá. This concept is not supported by modern evolutionary science. This is far too complex a subject to go into in this presentation, but I bring it up because one will sometimes hear Baha'is state, in reference to human evolution, there is no such thing as parallel evolution, by which they mean there is no such thing as parallel human evolution. While this statement is correct in the context of humans, any biologist will tell you that parallel evolution does occasionally occur in nature. This subject is under active research as presented in over 3,000 scientific papers in the last 5 years alone. Therefore, if a Baha'i simply states there is no such thing as parallel evolution, a biologist would simply think Baha'is don't know biology. We must avoid this. Coevolution occurs when two or more species influence each other's evolution over time, shaping their traits in response to mutual interactions. A prime example is the coevolution of pollinators and flowering plants, where the evolution of one species greatly influences the evolution of the other. To gain a better understanding of evolution, we will now briefly survey the history of evolutionary biology in just a few minutes. Given our limitation of time, please allow for necessary simplification. For the history of evolutionary biology, we'll start with Lamarckism. Jean-Baptiste de Lamarck was a French biologist active in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, who first propounded the modern concept of evolution. His proposed mechanism of evolution, that of the inheritance of acquired characteristics, has been largely discredited, but he laid the conceptual groundwork for Darwin's breakthrough. Charles Darwin revolutionized the field of biology with his groundbreaking theory of natural selection, detailed in his 1859 work on the origin of species. Darwin's theory proposed that organisms with traits better suited to their environments are more likely to survive and reproduce, passing on those traits to subsequent generations. Darwinism was followed by Neo-Darwinism. The father of Neo-Darwinism is generally considered to be the German biologist August Weismann. Weismann expanded on Darwin's theory of evolution by incorporating Mendelian genetics, rejecting the inheritance of acquired characteristics, and introducing the concept of the germplasm theory, which distinguishes between hereditary or germ cells and body or somatic cells, asserting that only germ cells can pass on genetic information to offspring. Julian Huxley was a prominent mid-century English evolutionary biologist and brother of Aldous Huxley, the author of Brave New World, and the grandson of Thomas Henry Huxley, Darwin's bulldog. In his 1942 monograph, Evolution, the Modern Synthesis, he unified neo-Darwinian ideas with additional insights from paleontology, population genetics, systematics, and developmental biology. In our current time, we have the rise of what is known as the extended evolutionary synthesis, a major proponent of which is the evolutionary biologist and philosopher of science, Massimo Pigliucci. Extended evolutionary synthesis expands upon the modern synthesis by incorporating additional mechanisms beyond genetic mutation and natural selection, which we will explore in greater detail in the next part of my talk. While the modern synthesis primarily focused on genes as the drivers of evolution, the extended evolutionary synthesis emphasizes the role of organismal development and environmental interactions in shaping evolutionary outcomes. Finally, we now come to a brief and very partial overview of current trends in evolutionary biology. A current trend in evolutionary biology is evolutionary genomics, which has at least 4 major components. First, a new focus on genomic, not genic, variation. By leveraging high-throughput sequencing and computational advances, evolutionary genomics examines entire genomes rather than isolated genes. Second, investigating advanced mechanisms of evolution. Instead of focusing solely on single organismal traits, evolutionary genomics integrates data from population genetics, phylogenetics, and quantitative genetics to reveal how whole genome variations accumulate and influence an organism's evolutionary trajectory. This leads to the methodology of big data analysis, or bioinformatics. The explosion of genomic data has transformed the way evolutionary questions are addressed. With vast amounts of sequence data available, researchers can reconstruct evolutionary histories with unprecedented resolution, uncover genomic regions involved in adaptation, and track demographic changes across populations and species. Lastly, evolution at multiple scales refers to bridging the gap between molecular changes and organismal evolution by linking genotype, which we can think of as an inner gene library, to phenotype, that is, to outward form and function of an organism, by studying evolution at higher and higher levels of biological organization. Evolutionary developmental biology, often shortened to EVO-DEVO, is a field that explores how changes in developmental processes contribute to evolutionary transformations. It examines how genetic and molecular mechanisms shape embryonic development and how variations in these processes can contribute to evolution. Research in identifying genetic and developmental pathways reveals how changes in genes and their regulatory networks can lead to variations in developmental processes across different species. Morphological evolution refers to changes in the physical form and structure of organisms over generations due to genetic variation, natural selection, and other evolutionary forces. In the context of evolutionary biology, plasticity refers to the changeability of organismal form and function. Developmental plasticity specifically refers to the effect of environmental factors on embryonic development, increasing the phenotypic variation of a species. In turn, the study of the evolution of developmental mechanisms examines how developmental processes, such as the sequential activation and inactivation of embryonic genes, have evolved over time. Phylogenetics focuses on the evolutionary relationships between species. By analyzing evolution-related data, phylogeneticists construct trees that map out these relationships, revealing the pathways of evolution and descent from common ancestors. Tree construction refers to the process of building phylogenetic trees that depict evolutionary relationships among species based on genetic, morphological, and paleontological data, which are subjected to sophisticated computational analysis. Molecular phylogenetics is the study of evolutionary relationships among organisms using genetic data, primarily DNA sequences. This approach has largely replaced traditional morphology-based classification, offering a more precise understanding of evolutionary history. Comparative genomics examines entire genome sequences, not just individual genes, across different species to identify similarities and differences. This approach helps uncover how species have evolved at the molecular level. Evolutionary ecology examines how ecological interactions shape evolutionary processes and how evolutionary changes influence ecological dynamics. Niche construction is the process by which organisms actively modify their environment, influencing their own and other species' evolutionary trajectories. These modifications, such as building nests, altering nutrient cycles, or changing physical conditions, can create new selective pressures that shape adaptation over generations. Genetic diversity plays a crucial role in evolutionary ecology by enabling populations to adapt to changing environments and resist threats like diseases and climate shifts. High genetic variation within a species enhances its ability to survive and evolve. Environmental stressors play a significant role in evolutionary ecology by shaping how organisms adapt to changing conditions. These stressors, which can be natural, such as climate fluctuations, predation, and resource scarcity, or anthropogenic, such as pollution and habitat destruction, create selective pressures that drive evolutionary change. Coevolution plays a crucial role in evolutionary ecology by shaping interactions between species through reciprocal evolutionary changes. And lastly, human activities significantly influence evolution by altering environmental conditions and creating new selective pressures for countless species. The hologenome theory of evolution proposes that an organism and all of the microorganisms that live on it and in it can function as a single evolutionary unit, collectively shaping genetic variation and adaptation. It recognizes that individual organisms do not live and evolve in isolation. A holobiont consists of a host organism and its associated microbiota, forming a biological entity in its own right. An example of this is a human individual with the normal healthy microbes that live in the gut. The holobiont represents a higher level of biological organization above an individual organism. The hologenome represents the collective genome of this system, which influences evolutionary processes that occur across multiple levels, from the host and its microbial partners to broader ecological interactions. The evolutionary history of the entire holobiont can be studied, allowing a more comprehensive understanding of evolution beyond the survival of individual organisms. Recent discoveries in genetics, fossil evidence, and interdisciplinary research are reshaping our understanding of human evolution, revealing new insights into migration patterns, adaptation, and interactions with ancient hominin species. Hominin interbreeding refers to the genetic exchange between early humanoid species such as Neanderthals and Denisovans and Homo sapiens through interbreeding events that occurred tens of thousands of years ago. Genetic studies reveal that modern humans outside Africa carry small percentages of Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA, indicating past hybridization that influenced traits like immunity and adaptation to different environments. This process played a significant role in shaping human genetic diversity and evolutionary history. Current research on brain evolution focuses on how genetic, environmental, and developmental factors have shaped the human brain over time. Cumulative culture refers to the process by which human knowledge, skills, and technologies build up over generations through social learning and innovation, and the reciprocal effects that cumulative culture has on human evolution. Paleogenetics is the study of ancient DNA to understand evolutionary history, particularly the genetic makeup of extinct hominins like Neanderthals and Denisovans. Advances in sequencing technology allow researchers to analyze preserved genetic material, revealing insights into interbreeding, adaptation, and inherited traits in modern humans. This field helps reconstruct migration patterns and evolutionary changes that shaped human diversity. For Baha'is wishing to engage in meaningful conversations with biologists, and with who I will call biology enthusiasts, there can be real difficulties. The problem is not with evolution per se. The scientific findings of modern evolutionary biology are entirely in accord with the Baha'i writings, which stands as an example of the essential harmony between real science and true religion. The problem lies elsewhere, in the received metaphysics that many, if not most, biologists adopt almost without reflection as the necessary stance of a modern biologist. To repeat, modern 21st century evolutionary biology is entirely consistent with the essential statements on evolution made by Abdu'l-Bahá over a century ago. There is no conflict. Yet, undoubtedly, most evolutionary biologists would take issue with the master's statements on evolution. Why is this? The answer is that their objections are actually philosophical, not scientific. The confusing of philosophical positions with scientific facts among scientists themselves is well known and documented by historians and philosophers of science. This phenomenon can be labeled epistemic confusion. In the following slides, we will examine facets of this. Surveys have shown that among natural scientists, biologists are the least likely to believe in God, largely due to the perceived conflict between evolution and creation. This tension has influenced how non-Baha'i scientists interpret the statements of Abdu'l-Bahá on evolution, which are generally not accepted when taken at face value. However, the basis for this non-acceptance is philosophical rather than scientific, though many biologists may not realize this, inadvertently conflating their epistemic stance with empirical scientific fact. For example, consider the concept of deity. The Baha'i perspective asserts that God exists and that is the source of all creation. This provides a spiritual framework for understanding existence. In contrast, the popular perspective among biologists is that there is no higher power or intelligence guiding the universe. Yet nothing in biology actually disproves the existence of God. Consider the concept of divine creation. The Baha'i perspective holds that God created, creates, and sustains all existence, including all forms of life. On the other hand, the common perspective among biologists is that the universe was not created but simply exists. Evolutionary hierarchy is another point of departure. In the Baha'i perspective, it suggests that, in terms of complexity and functional capacity, there are lower and higher forms of life, reflecting a gradient in biological sophistication. In contrast, the popular perspective among biologists contends that there is no ladder of life, proposing that all forms of life, including bacteria, have merely evolved for their respective niches. The notion of progress is another sticking point in Baha'i-related discourse. From the Baha'i perspective, life is seen as unfolding into ever greater levels of perfection, suggesting a purposeful and progressive evolution of life towards higher states of being. Conversely, the popular perspective among biologists argues that there is no inherent progress in evolution, but merely the illusion of progress from a series of blind, random adaptations. Closely allied with progress is the concept of teleology. From the Baha'i perspective, evolution is seen as having a clear direction, progressing from simple minerals to higher consciousness, suggesting an inherent purpose guiding the development of life. In contrast, the popular perspective among biologists posits that evolution has no predetermined direction or ultimate goal. Let's look at duality next. From the Baha'i viewpoint, ultimate existence is understood as being twofold, encompassing both physical and spiritual dimensions. In contrast, many biologists maintain that existence is exclusively material, devoid of any spiritual component. We turn now to the differing views on the human station in relation to other life forms. The Baha'i perspective asserts that humans possess a unique spirit or rational soul that distinguishes them from all other creatures. In contrast, most biologists view humans as merely another type of animal, emphasizing humanity's material and biological aspects without attributing any unique spiritual qualities. With that, I conclude. Thank you for your attention and interest.